Thank you very much for the introduction, Adam. And I am back in Houston, stationary, as you can see. So if the internet worked okay in that travel trailer, then I'm hoping it works okay for me here today. So really excited to help facilitate this panel on change management, which is something very near and dear to my heart, having been in the energy industry for 15 years and starting out in Wells and then moving into this digital space and really being an avid change agent for the last 5 years. So I've got some esteemed panelists. My personal mission is to engineer happiness, and I think these folks are going to help drive that message home. So without any further ado, really would like to kick off and introduce each of the panelists. So we have Filipe Mota da Silva with Tata Consultancy Services. We have David Hartell with Stellae Energy. We have Susan Peterson Sturm with Innosphere Ventures and Cognite. And we have Bryan Hill with Microsoft. And starting with you, Filipe, I'll ask each of the panelists just a quick background on yourself, and then maybe why you're passionate about discussing change management to round out the conference today.
Sure. Thank you so much. Filipe here from Tata Consulting. So I've been with Tata Consulting Service for the last 4 years and a half, leading our consulting team for energy, resources, and utilities. Been passionate about energy since I graduated 16 years ago on my chemical engineering degree, and been quite passionate about particularly now about the changes that are happening with our industry, with the energy transition, with climate challenges, and also with the myriad of technology opportunities that now are influencing how the sector can actually shape the future, not only about work, but the future of how we produce and also manage energy in the future.
Yeah, awesome, Filipe. Lots of use of the word change there. Very fitting for the topic. David, would you like to go next, please?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I've been in the energy industry for a long time, originally with engineering and then oil and gas companies. The last 10 years, I've been quite involved with digital transformation, integrated operations and production. And the last 2 years, doing a lot of work with energy transition. So seeing how all these tools and technologies from oil and gas and digital all can be applied to help us deliver better energy systems, especially geothermal and carbon capture and storage right now. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Welcome to the panel. Susan?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Well, I'm excited to be here today. I've spent about a decade in digital transformation, which kind of makes me giggle and wonder, have we transformed yet? But, I've been able to spend time in the power generation, oil and gas, chemical and water space. And frankly, the thing that gets me the most excited is how empowering this can be for our colleagues, right? To contribute, to be able to contribute through low code or through different types of technology, their own expertise into an application and into the way that we work in the future. And I think that kind of empowerment is really powerful. I think the foundation to it all, though, is having that common enterprise level view of data operations. So things like asset taxonomies, but basically having that one version of truth around operations and pulling it out of plant automation systems and into something that goes across the enterprise layer so that all stakeholders can have that excellent data and one version of truth to develop upon.
Thank you, Susan. I can't imagine employees being much happier than having a single version of truth, just the amount of discussions and arguments and pain that would avoid. So look forward to unpacking the empowerment piece a little bit later in the panel here. Last but not least, Bryan.
Hi, Ben. So I'm a client technology lead at Microsoft. So I've been working at Microsoft for about 6 years now, looking after some of our big customers, and particularly in the past 3 years, focusing on the energy market. So I look after 3 big UK energy organizations. And I'm also involved in some of the wider aspects that Microsoft is looking at around the energy transition, digital capabilities, how we can help the UK transition and decarbonize as well. Prior to that, I was in mobile telecoms. So I was at Vodafone for over 20 years, and that encompassed 13 different jobs. And I saw an awful lot of change in that industry as well. So I've seen change both from it happening to me from the inside, but also, in my current role, I'm working with organizations that are currently going through those changes. And for me, success really stands or falls on how the people are helped go through those transitions. Both those directly involved in digitalization, but also the ones that are going to be the end users, and ones that maybe they've been in certain roles and working in certain ways for many, many years. And change is really, really hard for people. And I think organizations need to put an awful lot of time and effort into helping their people transition as much as the technology side.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Another strong focus on the people, which is great, and not surprisingly will be key in this discussion around change management. So let's kick off maybe starting at the technology side. I'll ask for some advice that you might have to create a culture that truly embraces this digitalization. And Bryan, let's start with you.
Yeah, certainly. So for me, it's all around starting with the reason why. Be really clear about the vision for your organization, how it will benefit your company. And alongside that, you really need that strong, visible senior sponsorship. Transformation and digitalization needs to be part of the core strategy of the company. You might start the implementation in certain areas, but you should view these as being pathfinders rather than outliers going off and doing their own thing. They'll find it really hard to succeed if other parts of the organization aren't supporting what they're trying to do. So, for example, legal, security, these are parts of the organization can often challenge other areas when they're trying to do things differently. So they need to be brought along from the start. And then I think people need to have their measures and rewards aligned with these digitalization goals. Make the success of digitalization be success for everyone. So again, if people are being asked to spend time on something when it impacts on their day job, what they're measured on, it can be a real challenge. If you're looking at involving your end users, maybe your field workers, and getting them to spend some time helping you come up with new ways of working, new products, they need to feel that that's helping them as well. And then be really open. Engage and involve people at all levels of the organization. Everyone needs to feel it's something they're involved in rather than it being done to them. Face any concerns they have head on, work to resolve them, because you're really looking to build advocates and build emotional investment in the change. And then finally, I'd say patience. It will take time. It will be hard. There will be a lot of bumps along the way. So it's important to recognize this up front and just kind of persist and keep going.
Thank you, Bryan. Some great points about starting with why that I think is fundamental. And I really like your concept of measures and rewards, because there's a quote around every organization is perfectly set up to deliver the outcomes that they do. And so if you want to change the outcome, you better look at changing the incentives. Some great points. Thank you. Susan, I'll ask you, as many of our organizations are starting to develop their own apps, how have you been successful implementing DevSecOps in organizations that you've led?
Yeah, it's going to culture, right? It's so interesting to talk about Agile, when you're talking about like petroleum engineers or geophysicists, who are by nature a little bit risk adverse, right? And so when I think about it, I think about, Agile as the practice, continuous integration and deployment as the process, and DevSecOps as the culture, right? Ultimately, I think DevOps and DevSecOps are about empowerment, right? And it's about breaking down those silos and, creating fluency or expertise across multiple functions, but kind of getting teams to collaborate. And, ideally, I've worked in teams that have operations and engineering teams that, learn Python and learn Agile and learn how to code, which is awesome, right? From the DevSecOps place, what I've tried to do is bring in mentors that are good coaches to those teams, right? We've all had the heartbreak of having some awesome sensor or some new device that's really rad, that's been developed by folks in the field, and security was an afterthought. And that is a really big bummer to have to go back to the drawing board, right? So things like reference architecture, secure development lifecycle, the coaching and kind of creating security leads within teams, because it is awfully hard to, we really need to grow a lot of the expertise, because it's very hard to hire as many people as we probably would like to in operational technology security right now. So I think it's very promising, but it's just making it core. What I want to see around security is have it treated the same way as we treat about safety, right? We wouldn't think about developing something without security. And so I think we're getting there, but I think it really is a significant kind of cultural change, and we need to have good mentors and coaches and good visibility and make the time for it. Certainly is, as Bryan had mentioned before, right? Really carving out the time and making it a priority for the teams.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, and some great points again around empowerment, which I really like, and your comments around upskilling, right, and mentoring and helping get people to that place where those incentives and rewards will make a little more sense with their skill sets, and the comments on security, I think, are timeless. Chevron recently implemented a digital strategy to make sure that we have security at the point of design, which is exactly what you're talking about. It cannot be an afterthought, or we really will fail. So if we build on that a little bit further, what would be some key enablers to facilitating the change across the organization? And you touched on a few of these already, but architecture, service design, throughout that transition, what does that look like?
To me, I think it's the shift. The really big one is that shift to design thinking. And so I still think we're trying to get good at this in the B2B world and in the industrial world, right? But really, like, I could talk to colleagues about, anything in infinite detail about a technical specification. But what I really want to get to is, what's the workflow for that internal or external user? Are we creating any more, challenges or conflicts? Are we making this easier? How are we thinking about their experience? Because what we want is, we really want to have stickiness. We really want to kind of go viral within our organizations. And ultimately, what we want to do is promote up those users and those developers themselves. I mean, in the ideal world, what we're going to do is start facilitating developer communities within our organizations, right? So that design thinking skill set, I think, is really, really challenging. And I think that if we have that mindset, then we're in a better spot to evolve as our user stories evolve, right? And really think about that, continuous kind of life cycle of these applications and the workflows. And, the median age of an energy worker in the US is 56 right now. We've got a lot of gray matter that's getting close to leaving, and roles are going to be defined very differently, right? So really having intimacy around what those user stories are, what are the delighters, what are the challenges, what are the adjacencies, right? I think it's just, we can't emphasize that enough.
There's some great points. I like the stickiness, and I'm also glad we can still use the word go viral in a positive sense, given what's been happening in the world. And some really good points there, Susan, around the design thinking, the average age, the different roles, and it really ties back to what Bryan was talking about with the incentives and the rewards. So, David, I'll ask if anything to add to this topic.
Yeah, sure. I liked Susan's mention of agile and workflows and everything. One of the biggest things we see that goes wrong is people have hierarchical decision making. They have decisions are made far away from the assets. Maybe a multidiscipline type problem is broken into pieces too early on. There's a major oil company, I won't say their name to embarrass them, but they had an offshore facility and they had 3 data streams going out. One on the subsurface, one on the subsea, and one on the facilities. When they went off to different geographical locations, different teams, people looked at the data. Decision making was slow. It wasn't linked together. They lost probably hundreds of millions of dollars of value because they didn't optimize their wells and what was happening from the reservoir. So, people that have been successful have set up agile, multidiscipline teams closer to the asset and empowered to make more decisions. So, those are the people that have been successful. So someone else said this earlier, you can't just keep doing the same thing and expect different outcomes. We have great technologies, great tools, data is coming to us that we never had before. Use it in the right way, in the right place.
Thanks for the example and for protecting the innocent there. And I just want to highlight your thread on the reductionist thinking of breaking things down, which is how a lot of us, especially from the engineering world, are taught to think about things, versus this newer systems thinking approach of integrating. And instead of breaking everything down at the beginning, let's think about how things impact each other. So some really good points there, David. And I'll ask Bryan or Filipe, anything you'd like to add on to what's already been shared on this topic?
Yeah, no, I think, for my perspective, it's really about, one industry that is, on the apex of so many changes and that is traditionally also quite being change adverse, is how can you exercise that muscle of change that, enables a company or any corporations to actually be good at managing change and react quickly to the market dynamics. And I think, Susan touched upon agility, and I think from our perspective is really, it's kind of a good way to not only companies to address quickly what the market is spinning out there from a dynamics perspective, but also it gives already a vision on what the future, early vision, what the journey of change could look like, and enables companies to create this, what I would call the cycles of enthusiasm, which kind of brings the change leadership to the core of a program's success and enables things to actually move faster and get more people and stakeholders on board.
Yeah, I think just building on that a little bit, the suppressed desire to change within these organizations, where people have often felt frustrated that they see technology being used and better in their home lives, and they can see that they could be doing things far, far better and far more efficiently. And I think, as you say, that the circle of success, if you can demonstrate something is delivered quickly and it helps and people feel better about it, then it's just that virtuous circle within an organization.
Yeah, thank you both. That dichotomy between I'll book my transport and I'll order my food, I'll do all these things on my app, and then we roll into an office and pull up Microsoft Excel and start emailing files around to people and waiting a couple of weeks. It's I like the way you put it, the suppressed desire to change. And I'm also adding into my vocabulary a couple of positive approaches here: the circle of success and the cycles of enthusiasm that you touched on, Filipe. I think those are critical here as we start talking about this culture and talking about this change. So we're acknowledging that all this change is necessary, and we've touched on this a little bit already around empowering and motivating and incentives. But let's dig a little deeper into how do we transition our workforce, and specifically, we've got this balancing act. I almost picture a set of scales where we need to keep the lights on because a company that's out of business isn't going to make a whole lot of change for anyone, and making this transition to this brighter, prosperous future. So maybe, Filipe, if you want to kick us off on how can organizations effectively manage the change within this current environment and reduce the impact of change fatigue so we get the balancing act right?
Yeah, and I think it's a really great question, because in a particular setup of the sector where there is amplification of changes, with the market, as I mentioned, the market dynamics, the operational and workforce changes that we saw that COVID impact. I think the industry in itself is really on a look for how effectively can not only they manage change, but effectively execute on the changes that needed to be done for their companies to continue to survive and stay alive. Especially in the UK, because I think, as probably some of like the majority of the retail players are actually quite new to the sector compared to the last 10 years. So I think the key to manage this load, change load and fatigue, as well as to improve organizations' ability to be agile, it's really from our perspective within TCS is looking at what we call a visualization of the change data that is creating operational view of the changes that are happening currently in a company, and that looks at not only your journey throughout the change, but also the benefits that is actually giving in real time to the stakeholders and the shareholders. I think this is also an important factor. We are not just looking at the shareholders, but also the stakeholders across the organization, customers as well as employees. And the nature of this digital transformation that amplifies the way we need to address change from a cultural perspective is really around giving, as I was mentioning, and the visibility and the beginning of what that change could look like, to immerse as much as possible all the stakeholders into the process. And we worked with a couple of energy players across the globe on three actually major particular focus areas that enabled them to be ahead of what we call the change transformation journey. One was really looking around the digital culture transformation roadmap. And this pretty much charters, a pragmatic path for the organization towards their cultural change goals, and also allocates a particular change, a chief transformation or chief change officer across the company, who will be, anchoring all the changes that are going across the organization. The last 2 points is really about, creating a change toolkit that enables companies to get this change analytics view on real time of what the changes are happening and what will be the impact of these changes currently on their organization. It's also a good alert for majority of the top leadership to act in some of these particular areas. And I think thirdly, but not least, it's pretty much around, I think, what I related before on cycles of enthusiasm, which was around, bringing this end-to-end immersive experience and bringing it from the beginning of the journey for majority of the transformation digital programs that you currently have underway. And that really gives, in my view, a readiness to not only be, be quite close to your stakeholders, but also define the change steps that need to come ahead on the long journey for the energy organizations that we're currently working with.
Thank you, Filipe. Some great points, and I like how you started out with the call to action of making this an existential threat, right? Like, change is not an option, and there are grave consequences, and the idea of engaging all stakeholders, not just maybe the more traditional shareholders, and getting into that mapping place and actually using data to show your change and your maturity and the progress on that journey is very symbolic of the change we're trying to make itself to be data driven. So some great topics there. Bryan, I'll ask anything you'd like to add?
Yes, drawing on a little bit of personal experience of change within IT organizations. We've seen success where change, you start in one area first. You don't try and change all of your organization at once, particularly if it's a change of operating model. And I think that within Agile, you have the concept of your minimum viable products. You're looking almost at a minimum viable change, changing enough within the organization with a team of people whereby you can try it out, you can test, you can improve, you can see how well it works against the other parts of the organization, and then roll out more widely when you've understood those challenges and you've made those particular adaptations to how you're changing. And I think, again, something Filipe's covered is engaging everyone, some awareness of what's happening. You might find that, yes, you've got one group of people that are at the forefront of the change, but letting everyone else know, letting everyone else have access to the same level of kind of information and training, immersing people in opportunities, something I've just scribbled down, another great phrase. And we've seen that be really, really helpful because, again, this is a pathfinder. This isn't a completely different org that you may be setting up. This is the first part that you're changing.
So we got I heard the MVC, the minimal viable change, which I really like, and then the concept of over communicating, right? Communicate it and then tell them that you communicated it, because it's back to what Susan was touching on around the upskilling, right? If we're not involving people and showing them this, then they're not going to be motivated with the incentives, like Bryan said, to make the changes we need, and we're going to end up nowhere. So yeah, the the change curve you talked about reminds me of Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, and you have those folks that are going to jump on board, but you've got a leading majority, a vast majority, a lagging majority that need to get on board too, because unless you're a really small company, you're going to need more than the top 18%. David or Susan, anything to add on this topic?
Well, one of the things that I noticed to be successful like this was to have a more diverse team. Diversity means I don't want to have everybody that's always been in that department the same, so you got to kind of mix it up. And I brought in some younger people from different parts of the organization, from outside, and maybe people that'd be a little more enthusiastic about the change, maybe a little bit more comfortable with making change because they were used to doing it elsewhere, and having a blended kind of team like that was more successful.
Yeah, critical point, because... Oh, go ahead, Susan.
I read this article in Harvard Business Review this week about massive resignation of middle managers, right? And those middle managers are kind of the glue in organizations, especially around change management initiatives. So I think what's super important that we consider is if we're asking people to engage in a change or invest in a security skill set or a UX skill set, et cetera, right? We actually make time for them to be able to do it, right? And I have a wonderful example of someone that I'd been mentoring a little bit on cybersecurity, and their manager blocked their calendar off to go to an industry conference where there are a lot of like peers and he can build up his network. But those kinds of signals are very important, that it's, not just one more side hustle you're expected to bring to play at work, but really that we're investing as an organization. We have alignment between our stated values and our acted values. So, and I would say, as I've had an opportunity, I'm a Gen Xer, but working more with millennials, I think that alignment with say-do is super critical as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Susan. And managers, as you said, critical to the change. There's some, from a glass half empty approach, we may all be able to point to that frozen middle that we've perhaps seen in organizations, but the glass half full approach to that is once you get that middle manager cohort on board, you're moving along that change curve, right? And they now have influence going up, and of course they're directly seeing the work coming down. So yeah, back to your comment earlier around upskilling, right, and getting people motivated without the time to do so. It's talking out of both sides of your mouth. And David, I just wanted to come back to thank you for bringing up the diversity, getting away from the groupthink. If everyone's looking at a problem the same way and thinking about it the same way, we're unlikely to really get the change that we need. And or if we do get some change, it won't be enough to get us past that existential threat that Filipe was touching on earlier. So we've got a couple more prepared questions, but there's a couple of questions that have come up in the chat that I'm going to just sprinkle in. And a question here asking around, is digital transformation really a case of culture beating strategy? And I think we've had some good discussions so far around the culture. We haven't touched so much on the strategy side, so I'll open that up. I don't know if Susan, you'd like to take a first pass, or really anyone to discuss if it really is a case of culture beating strategy.
Well, I think I'm going to kick it to some people who maybe worked across broader swaths, because I think I have probably a really specific experience with that. So I'd love to hear like Bryan or Filipe or David, who've worked with a lot of different customers, maybe their inputs.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Bryan.
Go on, David.
Well, one of the terrible statistics we have is 70 to 80% of pilot rollouts of some of these changes fail, because people have spent all their time focusing on the technology, the tool, and they didn't spend the time on the people or the culture. And so when you look at the people who have been successful, that other 20 to 30% that were successful, they spend 50% of their budget on preparing people, the workflows, for people understanding what this was all about. Why are we doing this? One guy came and told me, he says, this isn't our problem, digital transformation. We have too much data. Well, he didn't understand what he was supposed to do with the data in the first place. Why were we getting this data? And did all that data need to come in, or could we process some of it on the edge? There's just fundamental things of working with the people. You can't just land a solution. It's likely to fail if you don't concentrate on the people and the culture.
And it comes back to that point on the being clear on what your strategy is as an organization. It's why are we doing this? Why are we going to be operating differently? And often, if you're looking at so the energy companies I work with, they have some huge challenges. If you look at energy generators, you look at grid operators, what they're going to have to do over the next 10 years is immense. They cannot achieve that working the way they've worked for the past 30, 40, 50 years. So the only way they can achieve their stated goals, and a lot of these are very public because they may be regulated. So they've made commitments to regulators about what they are going to be delivering. The only way they can deliver that is to embrace digitalization. And therefore, it does need to be front and center in their strategy, which will then help inform the culture and how their people operate and how everyone's bought into that overall goal.
Yeah, and I could also bring a good example. Not so much from a customer perspective, but actually from an organization perspective within TCS. So as a company, we were in the past as quite well known by our outsourcing majority. Or an arm of outsourcing. And in the last couple of years, we moved into become just, more than the outsourcing services company to become a trust advisor or technology advisor for clients. And that was really driven by a strong strategic footprint that the leadership had in mind to create what they call the growth and transform agenda across all sectors of the company. And we were not, the culture quite quickly shift from a pretty much service and a bread and butter type of services to a more strategic organization. And we were not only trained by different stakeholders across different academic institutions, but there was a strong mandate for all the different units to come up within the customers that they support on areas how they could create growth and transform initiatives for their clients. And this has been something that we've been addressing almost every year, and we have been monitoring also as an organization, not only from a training and cultural perspective, but also what will be the outputs and the impacts for the work that we are doing internally to the customers that we have. And clearly we shift by becoming today what we call a strategic technology advisor to clients, and it's still again a journey that we are working towards. I don't think the journey is completely done, but there has a strong shift and a strong cultural change within the organization.
Some great points from all of you, and just to pick up Filipe on that concept of the aim or infinite or getting away from them, that okay, the mission's done now, right? It is only, and it continues to evolve, and just when we think we've beaten it, we have to get faster at beating it again. And so hopefully this addressed the question that came through in the chat. Thanks, David, for the comments about people not really understanding what to do with the data and needing to transcend and move beyond that. And Bryan, your comments from the very beginning about start with why, get that clear purpose on the page. So maybe I can sum up everything everyone said with the old adage that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And maybe that's where this question was heading. But a great discussion. And if I can build on it with one more live chat question tying to data, since both David and Filipe in particular have brought this up already. The question says, has oil and gas, hold on a minute. Has oil and gas been late adopters of digital transformation because we are leading with the data as opposed to framing the change digital transformation is intended to accomplish? So maybe David, do you want to take a first crack at that?
Well, I suppose one of the challenges of oil and gas is that they lived in an analog world for so long, and people are used to manually capturing data, putting it in their reports and all that kind of stuff. Someone mentioned spreadsheets before, so people focus data. But like, how was that data then used? Well, sometimes that went off to some remote subject matter expert who munched away at it, did some analysis, and some indeterminate time later, the message came back, change the choke setting on the well. Did that have anything to do with the data? Maybe, maybe not. So people just they grew up not understanding the value of that data and how that should and could be used. It just wasn't transparent to them. So oil and gas had to see the success of other industries more explicitly adopting these things, these tools, technologies. So probably onshore oil and gas was a little quicker adopter than offshore oil and gas has been. But now the renewable energy industry, they don't have any, we don't have any excuse. We have good examples of how people succeeded, how they were fast followers. Don't get overly focused on the data, understand what we're trying to do with it. Maybe you're gathering the wrong data at the wrong frequency, the wrong bandwidth. You're gathering process data, but you needed some asset integrity data. That stuff has to be understood better and fed back to the people that are coming up with these tools and everything. You could have the best tool in the world capturing the wrong data. So what? You didn't get any value.
Some great points. And I think when I started my career, someone said, well, yeah, the onshore space is going to be leading forward in this technology. They probably would have been called a liar. So that's quite a nice switch of events. And you're really answering the essence of the question there around understanding what it is you want to do, right? Don't just gather the data, email it off to an SME and wait 3 weeks for an answer. Let's think about what is it we can do with this data. And then we go back and that drives the data that we need to collect. Any other panelists want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah. So pilot purgatory, right? And we think about data and the machinations we make to, compare a similar piece of equipment across a fleet, right? Or across a company. I'm a huge fan of data operations. About 20 years ago, I worked for a company in the independent power boom. And at the time we had buckets of money, so that was nice. But the value, right, and we spend a lot of time on having asset taxonomies, having ways that we could compare across. So building out those asset taxonomies, those data structures by priority use case, and then extending them, the return on your investment is massive, right? And to just, not only for that user story, but for the next one, right? So thinking about data in the context of how your investments can scale are really important, right? And then, back in my power days, the trading floor would talk about heat rate, as, Henry Hub divided by the, incremental heat rate. And, the ops folks would say, it's MMBTU divided by kilowatt hour. But the derivative, of how they were both speaking was based on the same fact of that asset. And so that value was massive. I know it can sound kind of boring, but if we can build those up based on the priority use cases, that will help us so much in scaling.
Pilot purgatory also going into my phrase dictionary is something we want to avoid. Filipe, Bryan, anything to add, or should we move on?
Yeah, I could add just, from my experience, I like that you talked, Susan, about oil trading and other trading, because I started my career as an oil trader. And I remember at that time, we had, more than 20 systems just, as a trader to, fulfill, information. And there was no, you repeat a lot of, you had to repeat a lot of the time the same information, the same depth. And we did have a lot, and we, and I think that oil and gas industry is quite well known because we do have tremendous enormous of data that, we still don't have access to, or the ability to process, or the ability to even, clean the information and actually get into analytics. And there is really here a huge potential for, and for continuous use potentially for companies like us, like Microsoft, but also, I do feel the industry tried to evolve and tried to, get to stages where they wanted to be on the forefront, but I think the technology wasn't there yet for them to be able to do. And I think some of the first companies who actually had access to computers was actually the oil and gas companies. So I think, we were, the industry is late, but I think the industry tried to keep, as much as they could with, again, with the investment cycles that, the oil prices were also enabling them to proceed.
Some great points there, Filipe. The the being a victim to the investment cycles. And I think we've all been in one of those 3D rooms and everything looks incredibly, even 20 years ago, you put a headset on and then, oh, we actually don't have the data from that well, or this piece is missing. So it's definitely been a journey. Maybe let's round out our prepared questions with this final one for all the panelists, and then we'll get through as many more of the online chat questions as we have time for. So, David, as companies have to allocate investments between technology or tools and then the people that have to use those tools, how do we strike that balance?
Well, I think what I commented on, I think you have to spend half of it on people and getting the right people in the right little teams. Someone else mentioned previously about how the demographic of the workforce, people are moving out the door over time. So you better capture as many of those lessons learned and knowledges and tools and put it into your analytics and things like that. We've still got renewables are being scaled up, but we probably have another 20, 30 years of carbon-based production at least, and that's not even considering we still need to do that for manufacturing. But capture the knowledge we have before we get out the door. Ask the right questions. Try what can we do to make value. So it's working with the people, and we can't just have analytics that produce sort of mathematical correlations. There has to be a physical reason for something. So when we do machine learning or AI, well, why did that give us that answer? And if we don't know why, then it's probably dangerous just automatically finding it. But we're trying to do stuff. We have tremendous data, and there's a lot more data we should be getting. They estimate that asset integrity data could be 7 to 8 times the volume of process-related data. And yes, yet we've really focused on process data. So again, this comes back to asking the right question. Are we looking at the right things? Are we, the changes that we want to install, or are they in the right place to do the right thing? To capture this data, what can we do with processing data on the edge? What's the best way to get it up into a cloud where we might be able to do advanced analytics, but ultimately feed back through to get better decisions made closer to the assets, so being more autonomous. We've got cars that drive around on the roads without anybody driving them. A little bit scary, but we're moving that way. So how can our energy facilities similarly have more things done? So catching problems earlier, adjusting operating integrity windows so that things operate a little bit smoother. That means they're going to last longer, less frequent maintenance. When we do need to do maintenance, it'll be at the right maintenance at the right time. These are the kind of things. Asking the right questions, getting the tools focused, and working with the people, then focus on those tools and stuff. And it'll probably be less than 50% of your budget.
Some really, really good points. And I want to pull on the thread you said about making sure that we transfer knowledge from folks who are leaving the industry. Because that, if you like to view the world as ors, you could look at that in contradiction to what I think it was Susan saying earlier about upskilling and training new people. But I'm a big fan of the and world because, well, you always get more with and than you do with or. And so maybe I'll ask Susan to comment around the new skills and the career paths and how perhaps that blends with what you're saying. It doesn't have to be, here's the way I did it, and you have to do it that way, or this is the new way and we don't want to listen to your way. There's probably a good ground and a good, strong business case for both. Do you think, Susan?
Yeah, and to be honest, in the functions, I haven't experienced that so much. It's been more when digital has not been done well, where it's like, hey, here are the smart people. Now you all sit down and listen to the smart people who haven't spent 20 years in the field with you. That does not work well, right? I think some of the skill sets, or one of the skill set around Agile, if we think about scaling, right, is around reference architecture. And so my belief in kind of the tech stack is we used to have these pretty siloed, especially in the process world, we used to have pretty siloed tech stacks, right? And I think it's going to look way less like a stovepipe and way more like a mesh. So if you think about security, architecture, networking, all of these things, for all of those devices, it gets to be a little scary. So being able to have extensible user stories around, okay, here are the components, this is where it's touching, these are the other enterprise systems that it's hitting. Then we have repeatable reference architectures that we can keep alive and improve and scale. And so that's one skill set that I've seen relatively new in this kind of digital innovation space and really critical for service design. But if we treat that as new each time and treat that as sort of like an engineering, chief engineer's review, that will take a lot longer. So that's one that I would hope to see kind of executed differently. And then we have some buckets of some of those reference architectures.
So a strong for reusing what's worked well, leveraging what's happened in the past, not inventing the wheel, and upskilling and training and taking on all these new approaches. So really, really good. Filipe, what do you think?
Yeah, no, just to add on some of the points that Susan and Dave mentioned. I think one of the things for us is quite relevant when we support clients is to look at it from a business case value realization, and I think we look at balancing risk, cost, and change impact. And I think here on the cost, Dave mentioned something that a lot of the times companies forget. And is about what is the people cost when people leave the business, when people actually do not share the knowledge, and a lot of the times they create a business case, and a lot of chief strategy officers, transformation officers look at the cost just merely from a technology perspective, and we do forget the people cost. And this is something that really needs to change in practical terms, because it really when you talk about your business drivers and the changes and benefits that you want, it's critical to be aligned your KPIs and the people KPIs to your business objectives. And if you forget that, I think you're already getting the business case wrong. And when you try to balance technology, tools, and people, eventually you will have always a problem to solve later. And I think from that perspective, the only other point that I think I would be worth it for me to add is really, we try also to advocate within the clients that we work with around, a business model, focus on people empowering technology. And that means that, we believe that it's critical to the success of any digital transformation that, we center, that technology, that particular program around the workforce or the customer.
You still there, Filipe?
I am here. I think something just...
We only lost 3 or 4 seconds.
Okay, no, I was just saying, it's critical, to the success of any transformational program to be centered around the workforce and the people and customer needs, because that I think will drive in any in the future for any organization the possibility to increase not only productivity but also the engagement within customers and within. I think that the last point that I think will be important to be considered, a business model that is focused on people empowering technology.
Yeah, I like that. That's a strong way to end. People empowering technology, and some great points around perhaps it's easy to understand this license costs this much or this piece of kit costs this much, and this person, we may be tempted to say, well, here's their salary and that's a cost, but the cost of people leaving, I'm dealing with it right now in one of our product teams where we lost a key person, and it's crippling to say the least. So thank you for highlighting that and bringing that up. Bryan, to round out this question, final comments on the balance between investing in technology tools, investing in people.
Yeah, I think that, they absolutely go hand in hand. As David pointed out, it probably is somewhere close to 50-50. There's been, I think, a few points around knowledge that people have within their heads, and how many organizations have within their process a end of project lessons learned activity where everyone goes into a room and writes everything down, and who knows whatever happens to it. So there are new tools, capabilities, AI, knowledge mining that can start to surface that information at the right time when it's needed for future products. So, how can we start to make use of that information that is being captured? And then the cost of technology is also falling. You can do things now far, far cheaper than you would have had to 5 years ago if you were looking to stand up a new cluster or a new data analytics platform. The investment in the hardware and the time would be enormous, but you can do things far, far more cheaply and much faster as well. And then I think Susan mentioned really early on about low code, no code development platforms that are empowering people to develop their own small applications, to optimize their own processes, to do some automation around their own day-to-day activities. And it runs from the end user, the guy or the girl in the field who's just trying to make their own lives easier, all the way through to professional developers that are looking to accelerate what they would have had to spend a lot of time coding themselves, and they can just start assembling the major building blocks and then get into the depths where they need to. And I think that that's really the areas we're seeing is there's a massive demand for people that can use, that can govern, can manage low code, no code. And then the other side really is around data wrangling, data engineering, analytics, ML, visualization, the whole range. When we look at our customers now trying to go through a digitalization process, it's those two areas. It's data and it's kind of the low code, no code.
Very, very well aligned with Satya's vision of the future there, by the sound of things, Bryan. So I want to... I just want to pull on that thread about the lessons learned, because I agree. We spend a lot of time, and on paper and in theory, it looks like, well, everything's captured, it's documented, usually in a spreadsheet, maybe in a PowerPoint. And like you say, maybe it's back to David's point where we then send that off to person X who's going to do whatever with it and bring it back at some undetermined future point, and that future never actually eventuates. So I think of everything you said, that for me is critical of using the technology, which you said is getting cheaper every day, to be able to leverage, because we are trying to catch this information. It's well-intentioned. It's a lot of people's time invested, and yet the outcome continues to disappoint us. So if we don't do something different, we're probably going to get the same outcomes. So that's all of the prepared questions that we had, and there's a couple more that have come in the chat, so I'd like to bring those up. I think we've got a few more minutes. So Andy says, having worked in the oil and gas industry for 25 years, I've not seen certified, trained, experienced, and competent change managers leading change initiatives. Is this likely to change? And judging by the smiles, I'm going to start with Filipe to give this one a shot.
I think ideally, I think there are some companies already doing that, and then you see from a lot of oil and gas companies, they change completely their their organization structure, and companies like Repsol, for example, they have a sector called or a unit called customer, and I think BP also changed completely their alignment. So I do think we are seeing more change in not the companies changing faster, but we are actually seeing now more change agents within these companies to drive and effectively they have KPIs and align to the outputs of the company business, which is something that I don't think we saw that before. And we see a lot of these digital programs also align to outputs, like reduce, the implementation of a particular platform will actually enable, 20% fewer incidents on a particular asset. So I think we are seeing that quite often. A lot of the times companies will look at, our side of the consulting side to manage that change and to support, the transformation officer. A lot of the times they do have already are, creating that line of training to have certified change leaders to drive it. So I, in a nutshell, I would say we are actually seeing things changing, and I think we will continue to go on that path, especially particularly in the oil and gas sector, because it's been heated. There's a lot of threats and competition right now. So the companies know that they need to act in ways that they didn't act before in order to continue in the sector.
So Filipe is giving a very positive vote to the question, is it likely to change? The answer in your crystal ball is very much yes. Susan was smiling the second most, but I'd like to get you to weigh in on this one too, please.
Yeah, so there's there's part of me over the past several years that I've thought about, being kind of a GE alum, that Six Sigma is almost anathema to Agile, right? And, you have a new idea and then everyone runs straight into process. And how do we optimize that process? And you're like, but what problem are we solving, people? And so I think there's a lot of value for people in companies and cultures, right, to have certification around those skill sets. To the earlier point, it's about making time to develop those expertise. But what it's really doing is creating a commonly understood language, and people understand the playbook and why people are doing that. So I actually think that kind of certification and training and investment in colleagues will make it feel safer for people who are trying to be change agents to do that, to be understood, and create kind of a common language that, if you think from a change management perspective, if everyone understands that process, that common understanding is massive. So I'm not a huge fan overall of kind of industry certifications, but if it makes it safer and it can reduce some of the friction, I'm all for it.
And so thank you, Susan. And I'm hearing you both tug on this. Look, we're going to have certification, we're going to have formal work, and maybe even to the point of reorganization. But then there are these informal, maybe unappointed, maybe not, as the question said, not necessarily trained change agents that we want to empower, right? Make them comfortable, back to the upskilling, back to the getting them in a place where they feel they can contribute and not get shut down or worse. So David or Bryan, anything to add to this one?
People need to understand why we're doing change also, to get them to accept it more and everything. So whether you have a formal change management managers, or whether you bring in external people that run some of your different HAZOPs, lesson learned sessions, everything. People, wherever that change management comes from, people have to then understand and clearly see, why is this change and why should they believe it? Why should they buy into it and everything? I've been doing this for 20 years. We never did that. Why do we have to do this? Is convincing people of that and everything. And Woodside out in Perth worked with IBM and looked back over something like 20 years of uncontextualized data reports and stuff, and tried to digest that all into Watson and get it linked into various topics and stuff so that people can understand those lessons learned. There they are, and you've got a problem, and here's why you should do this, is because these 4 projects had the same problem and solved it by doing, X, Y, Z. So, getting the why change understood by people, they'll be more readily accepting of it.
I just add one thing. I think it's been mentioned, but if your organization isn't big enough or doesn't have the money to invest in training its own people in change management, having its own professional set of people to do this, then get help. Get people that have done this many, many times with many organizations. Get the experts in, because a little bit of investment can go a hugely long way.
No, thanks, Bryan. It's a great point. And David touched on it. Could be formal BCMs. It could be internal folks that you've got. It could be external help. So it sounds like no need to have a limited mindset on this. Be abundant, right? Look for the help wherever we can get it, and hopefully that helps answer the question around. I heard 4 votes for the future does look bright, and we are going to have change. We're going to have change in our change management. And I heard 0 votes to say that we wouldn't. So time will tell, and I'm optimistic that our panelists got it right. So our time has come to an end. I would really like to thank all our panelists, Filipe, David, Bryan, and Susan. I think we covered a broad range of topics, from the minimal viable change through design thinking, reductionist versus systems thinking. Start with is always a big one for me. The cycles of enthusiasm, the essential change, the pilot purgatory. Lots and lots of good comments, lots and lots of good perspectives, and hopefully those joining in to listen are taking away that change, while we may have left it till the end of the conference, it may have been the last topic we talked about. That's often how it's handled in companies as well. And the lesson for the organizers is that time zones not permitting, this probably needs to be up the front, because without change management, without addressing the people, the upskilling and the knowledge transfer work, then all the best laid plans will fall apart. So with that, thank you very much to our panelists, and back over to you, Adam.